everybody. This week we've got a super special episode lined up as we talk to an entrepreneur and intrapreneur all rolled into one. For those of you who prefer to watch the podcast on the YouTube channel, we started with a bit of a sticky note quiz, and that reveals a little bit more about our guest's background. So if you're curious, make sure you tune in there for some surprise facts. My esteemed guest today is Matt Doran, co-founder of PaperCut's, a global leader in print management software. The company is headquartered in Melbourne, Australia, and has offices in the US and the UK, employing over 250 people. Matt studied in computer science and electrical engineering and spent 7 years in software consulting before teaming up with his co-founder Chris Dance to establish PaperCut in 2004. Through organic growth and without taking on external investors, they transformed PaperCut into the global market leader in the print management market. And for the past 3 years, IDC has recognized PaperCut as the market leader in this sector. In PaperCut, Matt's primary responsibilities were in technology and product engineering. As the company expanded, his emphasis then shifted towards people and culture. And recently, Matt transitioned from his operational role, but remains an active member of the PaperCut board. This is a tale that provides a rare glimpse into the mindset of a hugely successful business leader and reveals how people in startups, scale-ups, and globally known corporate entities can gear up for personal and organizational growth. Let's jump in. Hey, Matt. Really great to have you on the Company Road podcast this week. And I've been really incredibly excited to have you on the show as you're kind of a big deal. And before we get into it, I thought we might start with a bit of an energizer, as we do in our line of work. Sometimes we start a session with a bit of an icebreaker of some sort. And it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek type quiz. If you have your sticky notes ready, all I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to write a number onto your sticky note, and you're going to show your number on the screen. And I'll do the same from my experience, and we'll kind of compare notes as we go through, if that's okay.
All right.
So first question, how many years have you been in the working world?
Oh, good question.
Got to write it down. Don't say it. You got to write it down.
All right. I got to do the calculation. Yep.
Let's show. Yeah.
20.
Okay. Yeah. Do you remember your starting salary?
I don't know if I do. I could have a guess.
Have a guess.
Australian dollars, of course. Here we go. Okay.
There we go.
It may not be true. Who knows? Long time ago.
It may not be true. How many people do you reckon you've hired in your career?
Directly or indirectly?
Write both down.
Oh, geez.
I don't know the exact number either.
No,
there we go.
Whoa, where is it?
Yeah. How many people that you've worked with in some way over that time stand out as being truly inspirational to you?
Hard question. Wow. All right. 5.
Okay.
Maybe I'm generous.
How many resumes do you reckon you've reviewed in your career?
Oh, we're pretty close there.
How many times in your career do you reckon you've needed to update your resume?
Mine's going to be very unusual. Twice.
Yeah. Why do you think I'm asking you all these questions? That's the end of it.
Get me thinking about my career.
Yeah, it's mainly because you've had a long and extremely successful career with one company, mainly. And we want to hear your story. So can you walk us through where it all began and tell us what happened? What was your inspiration to begin with? And let's hear your story.
Yeah, okay. Well, the business is PaperCut. I mean, just to give you a high level overview, we build print management software, which sounds like, what the hell is that? The basic idea started in high schools where my business partner interned or did holiday work during university, where he saw piles of paper piled up just where students would print out a ridiculous amount of stuff and never pick it up. And that was the idea, a very simple idea of just trying to reduce waste. And he was like, surely there's a better way than just free slather. So that was the very simple idea. We knew each other at uni and sort of finished around the same time. I did software engineering. He was doing not software engineering, so he was picking my brains. And we sort of kicked it off. It was his little side project. We ended up moving out of home together into a share house. So we have a very long history together into a share house, and he was writing the software and I was helping him, really not part of the business at that stage. And a few years go by where in our careers, I'm in a software consultant, doing that typical software consultant thing, working in enterprises around Melbourne. My business partner also, Chris, got a job in software as well. And then a few years later, he just called me up and said, I want to do PaperCut full time. Do you want to join me? And that was at about 2004. That's almost 20 years ago now, a long time. Hence why I've only updated my resume maybe a couple of times. I got my first job, I had one job for 7 years and then PaperCut for 20, and that's it.
Yeah, wow. With that start, was it a big recruitment process? What was the kickoff there? Was it just a meeting in a pub somewhere, or how did it all happen?
I mean, the story of PaperCut is one of organic incremental growth. We were just two young guys in our 20s, kind of thought we knew how to build some software and had a bit of an idea for a product. And it was sort of the age where selling software on the internet became just much more accessible. So it was like, there's an opportunity here to do something and make it work. Chris had got the business to a point where it was sort of online, small scale. It was earning a little bit of income. And so we could make by while we got started. And really the first year or so was just us two in our rented houses in a spare room, just tapping away. He'd sort of neglected the product for a bit, working on it in his career. So we got it going, got it revived it a little bit, and then started the project of rebuilding the product from scratch with what he'd learned over the first few years of the part-time thing. And we did that for a year or so. And the guts of that product is what is still used today. It was just us two, and it probably took us a year or so before we said, oh, we'll be brave enough to get our own office and hire our first employee. That was after we'd worked in about 3 or 4 different rented houses within about a year. From there, it was just very incremental. We hired one. It was like a graduate software engineer. So we didn't have that much money. It was just like buy it in at the low end. And that employee is still with us today, unbelievably. Tom Clift, if he's listening to this, he's still with us today, like 20 years later. We had this really quite crappy office above like a hairdresser in Mount Waverley in Melbourne, and just hired one at a time, hiring always software developers. We were just software geeks building a product. And we probably had 5 or 6 software engineers before we hired our first non-software engineer, which was a support person. And it was just always very incremental, just always self-funded, just doing what felt right through that journey.
How did you know what to do, both within yourself and within the team that you were working? And how did you find out about where to play to each other's strengths a little bit?
So much of it is on instinct. I mean, Chris and my business partner has worked out so well because at our core, we have very similar values, I think, and we don't have to say too much to each other to know exactly what each other is thinking. And we complement each other really well. And most of the time, in those early days in particular, everybody was in the room and everybody did everything. You really played it by ear on who did what and when. I mean, as we got bigger, that changed a lot as we spread out into domains where we weren't familiar, marketing or sales or the other operations and accounting and all the other things that you've got to do. That changed. But those early days, it was very close-knit and quite different to what it felt like in the end when we had 250 people.
So was it a steady climb to 250? Did it go big and then smaller, or did it just grow fairly steadily?
Yeah, it probably took us 5 or so years to get to 20. And then there was a bit of a hockey stick. And I think one year we hired about 40 people, and that was like a shock. And it sort of just kept going from there. It was probably like a slow burn for 5 years. We got to 25 people in that Mount Waverley office. We were exploding out of the walls when we'd taken over the whole building, basically. Spent a lot of money moving into Hawthorne and outgrew that within like 18 months and had to do it all again and build another office. So yeah, it was exciting times. And because we're a global software business as well, we were also hiring people overseas, which is like a whole other thing.
Yeah. When did that start? Was that quite early on, or?
Yeah, it was quite early on. I think somebody who resold our software at one point, they liked it, and they were sort of supporting the software as a reseller, and we hired them as a contractor. Then it was a few contractors, then a little office. And it was mostly, there was virtually no management over there. We were sort of managing them from Australia. That's in Portland, Oregon, in the US. And we did that for a while. In the UK, we had one of our partners representing us for a long time before we did it ourselves. And it was quite a long time before we put in place serious management over there, just once it got to a scale that it was just starting to get impractical. Really, the story has been very organic. I guess looking back on it, we didn't have these amazingly thought out plans. We knew exactly what we're doing. It was really much like, well, what do we need to do next? And what is the next step on the path? What is the next thing we need to do? Feel a bit of pain in, support through the US. Oh, well, we've got to do something there. We've got to add to it. So it was just a very, very incremental. And I think it meant we could grow and grow well. We could add people that fit really well. And I guess that's part of the story here is our culture has been really great. It felt like a really great place to be. And I think trying to scale that has been a challenge, particularly through the COVID years. It added extra challenge to that, but really making it feel like everybody is a part of this. They're on the journey. We're here to have fun and make an impact along the way. That was something that was quite different. And I think being in it, I probably couldn't almost see it myself, but that was always reflected back to us when new people came in. It's like, wow, this place is a bit different. Just because we were just two software engineers who just wanted to have a fun place to work, and we had no external shareholders. We sort of could self-fund ourselves. So it just was a different sort of pressure. We could just do it the way we wanted to do it and what felt right. We got a long way on that sort of gut instinct of what is right for the business and what is right for the customer and what is right for the people.
Is there something about your approach to decision making that you feel has stood the test of time? From right at the beginning, it felt instinctive. Obviously, you went through the different stages of growth, but do you feel like an approach to decision making was always there? And how would you describe that?
Often, I think for me personally, there's definitely something about what feels right. There's sort of a gut feel for me. And I guess for me, I'm quite methodical and systematic. So I do like to think things through and hear all the inputs and listen to people, all those sort of things. So, and I think that too has held us in good stead. I think as you grow, it becomes harder to do that way, and that it is difficult. We had a tendency to want to listen to everybody and I have a tendency to listen to everybody and get all the inputs, but that can be a bit overwhelming as well. That has been a challenge in our culture because we wanted openness, but sometimes there's too many voices. It can be hard to sort of distill what is important from that. You can't please everybody all the time either. So you make those decisions, balancing all those inputs.
It's obviously a fine balance, I think, either in taking on enough in the way of listening to other voices or actually only listening to a select few. I mean, there are tons of businesses out there who would run off a small group of advisors and they would hold those opinions and points of expertise really dear and close to their hearts because they have a trusted relationship they've been running for years and years. Did you have that kind of infrastructure and framework, or was it all quite organic and almost fluid with the growth of the company?
Look, I think we always try to maintain a pretty flat structure. It feels like that's a really important thing, to be able to have people feel like they are heard. And we were always super accessible as the founders. And I think that people really like that. So that was always a real part of it. If we talk about culture, that was one of the principles we would put in place. I think one of them, we called it anyone can talk to anybody. It's like there's no, corner office or something where you can't go in. You can literally come to me, tell me something good, bad, or ugly, whatever. Come and say it, and we would encourage that. So I don't know about frameworks, but that was something that we did and still try to instill throughout. As I said, it is hard to scale that, and I think that's where small companies have a superpower. I think over big companies, it's like when you've got a tight-knit group of people who really understand each other and understand what needs to be done, understand how everything works, you can move very fast. And I think that was one of the things, as we got bigger, it felt a lot harder to do that. I mean, I've never worked in a big business, so I don't know how they do it. I know you work in those sort of areas and that's a big challenge, but there's something special about that sort of size of company. And I think, through that time, we got to the 50, that was a challenge, 100's a challenge. It's hard to maintain that same feel and the same level of performance and all those things that you had when you were small. You felt super efficient and super nimble. But you've got to grow, you've got to scale, but keeping that is a challenge.
Yeah. And had you always set out to scale and go big?
I don't think so. I guess these days you look at everybody's venture capital and a big exit and scaling, and everybody understands that. But I mean, 20 years ago, I didn't understand it. Maybe some people did. And I think, as I said, we were very organic and very bottom up. When we brought on those US employees who came from other businesses, they were like, you could market this like crazy and scale so fast. What are you doing? You have an amazing product. And it just wasn't the way we thought. We were much more the if you build it, they will come kind of thing. We were engineers, build a solid product. And I think an interesting sort of part of the story, early days, Chris and myself, the founders, even for a very long time, we'd have pretty much only software developers in the team. We would all do support in the morning. We would come in the morning, being in Australia, all the support comes in overnight. We all sit down and do the support for an hour or two. And that bred some sort of culture of extremely good customer experience and customer support. And that was something that we still do stand by. And it bred this cycle in the product of immediate feedback, and I'm the developer, I can go fix that now. Oh, that's a great idea. That was something that was a superpower for the business, and we kept that for a long time. That was extremely hard to scale. I don't know that we've been able to scale it, but that was definitely something that allowed us to build a product that was fantastic. It had such a great fit for the market that we were after. In particular, that started in education and then built out to commercial businesses, but it became a product that fit the market so well, it just sold itself. And getting back to your question, we didn't have this big plan about how we can grow. It was very organic. We had a great product, word of mouth, reputation, amazing customer advocates, all these things you hear about in customer experience now, that came just not through any theorizing about customer experience. It just came through giving customers great experiences. And we had advocates. We'd have people on forums just recommending us or saying, you have to use this product. So that sort of bottom up, build it if you build it and they will come, worked for us, I guess, in whether we were fortunate or in the right market, found that little niche, but it worked really well. And it never was that we're going to, not for me anyway, we're going to take over the world and this is what we're going to be. I would have never guessed we would have had 250 employees ever until it happened.
250, and then you're across multiple countries. How many countries?
Like we're sold into, I don't know what the number is. It's many. All of the major countries, I would say, we're sold into. Probably something like, 40% of our sales go into North America, 40% into Europe, and maybe 20% to Australia, largely through resellers. So it's not a direct-to-consumer model. We've been fortunate to find a very powerful sales force, which we didn't have to have ourselves. So we were really a channel sold product. But yeah, sold all throughout the world. And Australia's a long way away from most of our market. And it was always very humbling to go over to the US and just see how well-known and well-loved your product is. Australia's a long way away, both in time and distance, and sometimes it's hard to be immersed in the market from the distance over here sometimes. So another part of the challenge.
Missing the travel?
No, I was never the big traveler. So I was mainly in our head office building the product and handling operation. Chris was he would often, although he's an engineer as well, he was more the get out and sell the product and visit all of the market and channels. So I stayed away from most of that.
Was there a step in that process and in the culture building sense, was there something that plugged your HQ into the way in which it was being received, other than the thing every morning? If it was being showcased around the world and Chris would go out and do that, was there a kind of feedback loop there as well that would allow people to get across how the product was being seen or received in its later days? We
always had a really big support team, and that was probably our real big interface. Comparatively to most software companies, it's quite a big support team. It's like that. We pride ourselves on being able to really support the customers. So that is our touchstone. We would often, at our global all hands meetings, we would be trying to bring back customer stories and things into the business, because it is sometimes quite hard to get them. The development teams who are dedicated to the product and building, most of them all of them were pretty much in Australia. And sometimes it's hard for them to get the real sense of the market, sense of the product, sense of the customers in that distance. And customer stories is one way we've done that, and trying to bring that back in, getting them to go out and do tours as well with customers can help as well. We've had some amazing customers over the years. Early on, we thought the big universities like the Cambridges and the Harvards of the world running our software was really big. And that was always very sort of proud. And that would make everybody feel like we are really legit. In the last couple of years, we got Google as a customer, which as software geeks, that sort of feels like a bit like the pinnacle. If you can imagine the sort of rigor that would be required to get a bit of enterprise software into Google when they're all amazing software engineers and probably pretty critical of security and many, many other things. That was like an amazing team effort. Like it took a long time, but it's a very proud sort of badge to have. And they even put up a video. We've got a video testimonial of it somewhere. So they're willing to get up and say how we work well with them and stuff. It's a really proud moment for me and the team.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, what an accolade, and what a piece of recognition to get back from, as you say, the biggest software development company in the world. I think. Are they?
They're up there anyway.
If they're up, they'd be up there, wouldn't they? Yeah. And I mean, this is an amazing story, because not only in the success that you've seen, but in the fact that you and Chris and the team, by the sounds of it, a lot of you stayed through that process and you were building the company over all those years. If I can ask you about yourself, what was driving you personally during that time to keep going, to keep trying things out? What was driving you?
I like solving problems. I guess that's one thing that I would always continue to love to do. I think I probably like solving technical problems more than, operating a business. I'm very much a software engineering sort of geek at heart. So I loved continuing to be pretty hands-on. I wouldn't be sort of probably day-to-day writing code in terms of features and stuff, but I would be definitely in there when big customer issues would come up, and I'd be in there with everybody trying to help out and really just show that I'm just the same as everybody else in the team and I'm going to help out. So a lot of that motivation comes from working with great people, solving problems. It's not very fun working with not good people. If you can have fun with people while you're working hard, I think that goes a long way. One memory I have, we build software that runs on the photocopiers, which is they're not the best platforms to build software on. They're pretty hard and they're kind of closed ecosystems. You have to get permission and certification. And me and one of the engineers went over to Konica Minolta. It was a really, really hard week. They had to test it. If they found bugs, we had to turn them around. We visited Connecticut. We were over there. We had like 4 days. And it was like one of the hardest weeks I'd ever had, but it was one of the funnest and most memorable experience I ever had because we were just solving problems, working closely together. And it's just one of my most favorite memories. And I'll never forget it.
I was going to ask you about your superpower, but I think you've answered the question already. Do you want to build on that in any way?
Yeah, I think probably in that problem-solving area is probably one that I do think is a bit of my superpower. I think our software is quite complicated. We interact with many devices in complicated environments. One example was WeWork, which is a very big office space company. And just when you get a problem, there's a tendency to sort of look for the problem elsewhere, like it's probably the customer's problem. They've done something wrong or their network's wrong or whatever, but really just always stepping back and being really honest and methodical about analyzing problems and liaising with the customer through that process and saying, look, if you work with us, we will find the problem. So that was what became one of my superpowers. I could, even in the worst sort of customer issues where there's systems down and they are in some ways screaming at you, I got very good at being able to say, look, trust me and work with me. And with our team, we will get there. We will find the issue. If you trust us and allow us to install patches and get data from you. So that became, and it's amazing, those sort of things that feel like a crisis at the time, like a massive customer who's saying, we're going to uninstall your software or whatever, those sort of things where you think, and the reseller is screaming at you and the salespeople, everybody's screaming. In those moments where you can solve the issue in a calm and methodical way, you get to the end of it, as much as it's painful, you have won all of those people's sort of admiration and respect, even though they're extremely stressful at the time, if you do it well. And you don't want those things to happen, but they happen. And if you can, I think that I have a calm approach to that. And I think I would tend to calm down everybody around me by just sort of saying, let's just figure this out.
Yeah, well, the problems are always going to be there in this world, in this industry. It sounds like you had a good approach to that. Was it always there? Is it something that you taught yourself and consciously learned? Or do you feel like at the start of your career, it was like impossible is nothing and I'm the sensei and I can do whatever I like because I can fix anything. Just show me the problem and I'll fix it. But did you notice at some point more in terms of your self-awareness, did you notice at some point that you were more well-equipped for problem solving than you were before, or was it always the case?
It's definitely learned. I mean, it's a bit nature and a bit nurture, I think probably is the reality. I think I tend to be quite a methodical thinker and try to eliminate problems, break things down and eliminate problems, break them down. But equally, you can't just do that straight away. So I remember the early consulting, software consulting, that industry, hire graduates, throw them in the deep end and figure it out. That was a bit of a baptism of fire that didn't help, that helped as well. I think engineering degrees as well also help. Like I didn't come through pure software engineering or those things, which I don't know, engineering is a really hard degree. And I think it really gets you in a problem solving mindset. So it probably started there, but yeah, it continues today. I think I love to solve problems, not just in work environment, everywhere. It's definitely sort of a part of my identity, I think, solving a tricky problem.
It's interesting because you come at it from an engineering point of view, which I guess people would have preconceptions about. In my line of work, it's all about human-centered design, and we're often looking primarily to the people that are going to be using something to be able to understand whether it's going to be valued or what their pain points are. Reframing the problem is always part of that. But is there an approach that you would recommend and stand by in breaking down a problem, or what to go to first, or do you feel that it's instinctive?
I think we do, as humans, have a tendency to jump to conclusions and have confirmation bias a lot of the time and really rely on things from our past. Our past can be good, but it can also lead us astray as well. So I think that mindset, that engineering mindset, is, I think, really being open-minded and very honest about owning the problem as well, like not trying to deflect it, like, say this, assuming it's my problem. That's a good place for a software company to start, rather than assuming it's somebody else's problem. And one of the techniques in engineering is sort of 5 whys, not just looking at the surface. Why did this problem happen? Go into that. So then why did that happen? And trying to go back to the root as well, so that you don't just put a Band-Aid on, but you actually solve the problem. Yeah, it's a good thing to do with a team as well, to get other ideas when there's something that's really gnarly and you're looking for something deeper. My mind is going to technical problems, which sometimes are quite hard to get a pinpoint on. So you need to really think hard about it sometimes.
What kind of technical problem, just to explain, what would that kind of problem be?
I mean, the ones that often come to mind are scaling problems with software. When we have, these days, maybe it's a bit different with cloud. Software is architected in a bit different way than on-premise software. We had on-premise software. We're now building cloud-based software, which is completely learnt from 20 years of experience in building public cloud infrastructure. But a lot of those early problems were building enterprise software. You've got like a server running something. And if you've got a Google or a big company with many devices, you enter a new environment and there's some variable that you hadn't planned for that is different. Maybe it's many more users or a weird combination of devices, or there's some parameter that is different than what you expected. And unlike maybe cloud infrastructure where you are running the operation and you have the sort of DevOps and you have the visibility of everything, on these massive corporate environments, you get a report. And you know what sort of customer reports are like. They can be very vague. The system stopped working or something. And you have to remotely or through intermediaries try to diagnose a really technical scaling problem. That's an example. You have to do it through often collecting a lot of remote data from customers and handing files back and forth and those sort of things. It becomes like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. Sounds good. I don't envy you. I mean, I'm still, the things are spinning in my head. I'm still wondering about imposter syndrome and whether that did not or did kick in for you at any point, or whether you thought, I'm just going to have a go at this problem because I need to fix it. Sounds like you're very determined.
Well, I think that's on the technical one. It's a much more comfortable environment. I guess when you get into leading a company when you've never been a leader in a company before. We were just lowly employees who built a company and learnt everything on the way. So there's definitely more imposter syndrome in that respect, and you never can know enough. And hiring new people with different expertise that you can rely on, or looking for an external coach or something that can give you some extra perspective that you didn't have. And that has been another journey. I think that's probably my biggest personal learning would have been much more self-awareness and understanding myself more. I think that is something that I don't think can be underestimated as a leader in a business, that sort of understanding those subconscious things that we do, or the way that we interact with people or avoid some things, or all those sort of quirks of our psychology, and trying to understand ourselves and be aware of our weaknesses or aware of our fears and those things, and really trying to understand them and live with them or come to terms with them. I think that is a sort of a thing that I think is one of my biggest learnings. It's probably only come in the last 5 years more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, people definitely say that you can't teach management in a way. You have to experience it. And obviously you can look at the theory, but actually it's very much a case of getting in and doing it. Did you find your own way with that? And did you find out about yourself through doing that yourself?
No, I did it with other people reflecting it back at me. I'm becoming more reflective, but I don't think I was at all. I think a lot of these things I didn't understand much about myself. And I think it took some very trusted coaches really to ask me good questions or point out, observe things, behaviors in myself that they felt that I wasn't even aware of. As an example, like self-confidence or in myself. I'm I'm a worrier. I get anxious. So like, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right thing to do for the people or the right decision to make? And I can get in my head a lot. And I didn't realize how much of that would come out of my mouth. It sounds very genuine, but having that pointed out to you and reflecting on that allows you to improve yourself and be more aware of it and say, what is going on there and how can I improve myself? So having a trusted coach has been amazing, because I guess as a leader, you don't go into psych safety and those sort of things. People don't often, they're not going to really point out some of your weaknesses. It's something that can be quite a brave move for people to do in an organization.
Where do you go for one of those? It's hard to find the right match, isn't it? And to get to the point where you think like you need one. When would that happen for anybody?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you look back at the big turning points in a business. Often, I don't think we knew. I can't explain how they happened. Maybe they happened fate. I don't know. Maybe that just at the right time. Things like example of, I mean, the coach I'm thinking of, we were doing an executive hiring process, and we hired our first round of execs when we were 20 odd people, and they grew with us a long way. And then when we had to hire again, we were much bigger, and it felt like a much bigger deal and much more, I don't know, a harder thing. And at that point, the recruiter brought in somebody who was to help with the onboarding, the sort of the integration, and she ended up being a great coach. So we sort of found each other. We didn't go looking. So, but there have been others.
Do you believe in that? Do you believe in putting things out into the universe and then them coming back in one way or another? Things come at the right time. And serendipity, you mentioned that, but do you feel that happens?
It does happen. I'm not very woo-woo or not very in that mindset, but it does seem to happen. It's a bit hard to explain, but I guess if you're trying your best and putting it out there, maybe the things come to you. An example that comes to mind for me, these things you learn, which you think early on, you think, oh, that's big company sort of crap. And over time, you learn that some of that stuff's really important. Probably one of the first ones for us, we did a branding exercise. And
how was that?
It was amazing in the end. But I think that was our marketing person at the time. She said we should do it. We had a very basic brand. This was probably, I don't know, 5-8 years in. We had probably 30, 40 people. And we did this branding exercise. And not only did we end up with an amazing brand, which is on our website today, and it really captured the quirkiness and the casual sort of nature of the way we interacted with our customers, but it actually helped us identify who we were as a business and articulate our personality and our values, which we'd never done before. It felt different from there. I don't think it was a very long process, but over the course of weeks and interviews and brainstorming our values and who we are, they are still today, the 4 values that came out are still talked about. It became not only our brand, but it became our identity, like really our identity. I mean, it sounds obvious as a brand is your identity, but I mean like our identity, our internal identity, our values, who we are, how we act. And probably before that, I would have thought branding, who cares? But I was completely naive to that. And it was sort of an amazing experience looking back on it.
So you went in with open eyes. You were all quite curious to see what would happen. What's your attitude towards failure or experimentation or risk, if I can ask?
I think I personally struggle with failure, maybe like we all do. I'm scared of failure like everybody else, but I know that's not what we want in our cultures. We don't want to blame people for mistakes. We want to allow people to learn, and that's what we all do. And I think that is something that I started off at being a techie, but I'm now a board member. I'm not less operational in the business, but my last role in the business was like head of people, which is very different. Again, I would have never, ever picked myself as being that if I look back at the start of my career. But it got to a point where I was like, that is the most important thing. And really thinking about, what makes people tick and how to make them supported and all those things became the most important thing. The psych safety thing, that became like a big thing that I got very interested in. I know like the studies show that it's a big factor in performance. And you can sort of see, thinking back on the business when we were smaller and we nurtured that anyone can talk to anyone, everybody knows everyone, you're very close knit, and it is really safe. And it's just harder to scale it when there's distance between people. I think the sort of gut instinct when you hear psych safety, it's like, oh, well, is it okay to give somebody some harsh feedback, my boss or something like that? But it's so much more than that. That's one element of it that that wasn't a problem, but it's, are my opinions heard? Do I feel like I know what I need to do and I know where I fit into the big picture, and Do I feel like I belong? All these sort of things, factors that go into it. It's not purely about, do I feel safe to say something to my boss? That is something that, again, came naturally when you are one smallish team, and it gets harder and harder to scale up when there's layers of teams and managers and other things in between you and everybody else.
Did you feel consciously that there was a point where you're almost needing to take more responsibility of other people than for yourself and your own actions? Did that happen at any point in your journey?
There was definitely a transition point where it went from being obvious what needed to be done to once it gets too big that you can't know everybody and sort of be across everything. And I think that was some of our challenge. I think having grown up in the way we did, self-funded, very organic, switching from and very kind of reactive. Reactive can be used in a bad sense, but reactive in a good way, where you are really close to what needs to be done, what the customer needs, and you adapt fast, to a business where I think there's still in our DNA, we want to do that, we want to be that, but you can't get 200 people being super reactive because they're like, I thought we were going this direction and you told me to go that direction and I haven't even finished where I was going. That real balance of being nimble but giving people enough sort of direction and balancing that nimbleness versus direction and planning is a big challenge. And I think for us, coming from the very nimble side, we probably have the opposite of what I can imagine in big corporates, where we're like too nimble and people get frustrated because we're changing our minds too often. And I think that became a discipline, which is to like, okay, we've got a plan. It's right. Stick to it. Don't change it, and try to get everybody lined up behind it. That is something that we've had to learn, and we're still learning and getting better at.
Yeah, talking about plan or strategy, what are the things that you think work well in anchoring the direction of the company? What can people get behind? You've talked about branding, but what else do you think stands out as something that was really worth doing?
Look, I think one thing we have done well and people resonate with is having a purpose that people can line behind. And for us, we're in print management. Chris, my business partner, likes to say we're the coolest company in the most boring part of tech or something. Like, people like printers, like, really? So we are like a fun company in this weirdly boring place. Like, how can you inspire people to come and work for a printer management company? But we ended up doing it. There was purpose. So we were very early into the sort of waste and environmental angle. Was like, as I said at the beginning, our initial idea was stop wasting paper at the printer, which now translates to wasting energy and all the other things that go along with it. At one point, it was just a little idea. It was a feature tracking how much environmental impact the product made, but it became a part of our identity. It became a part of our purpose. That if we could, through the software, encourage more responsible printing and less waste, then we are having an impact. And we have millions of end users, customers using the software. And if we save an X% of what they print, it makes a big difference. We continually would hear stories where like universities would install the software and their printing budgets are unbelievable. We would hear stories where they've reduced their printing by half or quarter, and it's thousands and thousands and thousands of reams or tons of paper. So that ended up becoming a purpose to some degree. It's just, what can we do to, in our little part of the world, our little niche, make an impact? And that was counter to the whole industry, which is selling office equipment, which makes their money on people printing more pages. That is their business model. So we were kind of a disruptor in the fact that our software kind of goes against their business model, but people wanted the software, particularly in education where it was like a real strong need. So that became a purpose for people. I think that's a starting point. And for a lot of time where we struggled to articulate a strategy, learning how to to have a strategy and have a plan, we tried various things and getting better at it and articulating better. But that underlying purpose, along with sort of a fun culture, took us a long way.
This is a golden question, but how far in advance do you think you can plan for your corporate direction and strategy and set a plan meaningfully?
I admire people who are great leaders, who are planners. It's not sort of in my nature. I'm probably more the fly by the seat of the pants a little bit. But in the most recent iteration over the last few years, we had strategy consultants come in. We tried a few in the past. We tried various things, but we did a 5-3-2-1 kind of plan. probably very common, but that worked pretty well. It was really well received, even though it's hard and you can't have all the answers. It was very well received just to be able to sort of set like, in 5 years, we can be this. Like, we don't quite know how we're going to get there, and then trying to work back and put in a few pieces. We're in the middle of that. We're up to year 2 or 3 now in that. But I mean, that very simple framework, that was our best attempt at it, to try and think about it that way. Just like make the 5 years something that's feels a bit of a stretch and see how we can get there.
And how do you think businesses can almost translate that level of artifact into something that's meaningful for people on the ground to be able to use and understand and work with? Do you have any stories along those lines or evidence of that working?
I think it was very well received for us to be able to articulate where we wanted to be in the future. I think even alone, that makes people feel like, okay, it's hard to align a group of people in the same direction. At least people can go like, I don't know, that sounds ambitious. I'm not sure I believe it, but it sounds a bit interesting and it sounds about right. And I think that alone makes people feel a confidence or something. They feel something that they want to give it a go. And then working back, I guess, and going, okay, if we're going to do that, we need to do this by 3 years, we need to do this by 2. And then the 1 year, it was quite a helpful exercise. I think in the end, the first year we did that, we had so much on that list, too much, way too much. That has been a bit of a fault of ours as well. Sort of with a business that's got a lot of customers and a lot of day-to-day, trying to figure out how to do the strategic stuff, the right balance of push and reality when there's a day-to-day to deal with as well has been a challenge for us as well. There was a bit of a tendency to do too much. So I don't know, to get back to your question, I don't think you're going to have all the answers. Ultimately you need a business who can mostly drive itself. People need to have some self-direction, and if you can point them in the right direction, that's a pretty good start. I think that balance of sort of accountability versus autonomy is a really tough kind of one to figure out, and I don't claim to know I'll have all the answers there.
Yeah, fair enough. That's good. I mean, there are different schools of thought around innovation. Obviously, sometimes it's very well and methodically planned out. Sometimes it's a bit more of a coincidence in and around incremental innovation, or something that would happen or is born out of business as usual, born out of the day-to-day because somebody takes the initiative. And because they know roughly where the company is going, they can just jump in and try something. But in other cases, it takes a massive shift or a catalyst or a big initiative or a consultancy or whoever it is to come in and actually set a new vision, set a new direction, get people trying and experimenting with new things. Did you find in any of those areas that there was either a lean towards maybe more around the BAU and kind of surfacing ideas around progress from within, or that you needed to have external forces and trends and other things that would spark some of those ideas?
I lean more towards the innovation it's not a magical thing. It comes through people being close to the problem, knowing the problem well, listening to the customers, and, if you're paying attention, those ideas will come up. I think I'm more of that mindset. I understand the other as well, because we've also realized that we want to diversify, and then coming up with more greenfields, sort of out there adjacencies, that is a much, much harder problem, much more uncertainty. By its nature, it's not what you know. So it's much harder to go into. So, I mean, there's so much innovation possibilities within the stuff and the day-to-day if you are listening and paying attention. And I think that, to me, is where you're most likely to be successful and you're most likely to be fruitful. It's the whole blue sky thing is like, I'm competing with every other blue sky kind of thing. What is your competitive advantage going to be over there that's going to really make you win? So I think that is amazingly difficult. It's something we're thinking about to say, well, where do we go? Where do we go to next? But it feels like the best bang for buck is going to be innovate close to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, it got you through the doors of Google. I think something was working. Maybe that was on one of your blue sky plans at one stage to get onto the Google books. But that's amazing. I mean, what a story. And just thinking back, what are some of the big learnings that jump out, either from key moments, or what are some of the big things that you think, those are points at which we really learned something big?
I've mentioned the branding one. I think that's important, like defining who you are as a business and your sort of values. That sounded like a very fluffy thing when I was figuring out values. Why would we, what does that mean? But I think it is really important. It does drive the people you attract and the way you work together. I think that is a really very strong, really important thing. We would use that in our onboarding process, and we'd have a whole slide deck around values and principles, things that would get people to sort of understand who we are quickly. I think it's very well understood now, but for me, it was a massive learning. Simplicity and clarity of direction as well. Like, I think businesses get really complicated. Everything gets really complicated. Over time, you add things, processes get more complicated. Everything's getting more like looking for simplicity everywhere. I think that will get you a long way. And the importance of people, like in a business like ours, it's everything. So a strong focus on growing your people and making sure they feel like they have the sort of right balance of autonomy and guidance and direction is just so important. It's such a competitive world, not only for people, but for products and everything. I guess where it begins and ends, really, to a degree.
On the people point, what were some of the secrets around getting people on board with the culture that you created?
One of the things we would always say is we just wanted to create a place where we would want to work ourselves. And that probably held us in good stead for a long time. And I think we were lucky because we've been successful, organic growth, always profitable, always growing. It meant we didn't have some pressures that other companies would have at times where we could do things that would maybe be a bit luxurious. Maybe they are not typical. I think that would be one thing. We are not typical. People are always like, that's strange. But it's like, I don't know, it worked for us. And that sort of quirkiness and friendliness, and ultimately it was a part of our values that we just wanted to be enjoying the ride as well. It wasn't about making money or paying the investors back or getting a big exit or whatever. Part of it is just about having a sustainable, fun journey. And we took that philosophy, I mean, that's probably worth talking about as well. It's not just internal to us. We had a huge partner network of distributors that almost became a part of our organization. Their branding looks like our branding. And it came through treating them like with respect, not just like somebody who's going to sell you software, but like true partners. That just came from this instinct of like doing right by people and very basic stuff. But I don't know if that was only possible because we had this sort of luxury of there wasn't this pressure to always squeeze the last dollar or whatever it is. It's an amazing ride. Yeah, just laying it out to you today. It's good to do because I don't often reflect on it.
How does it feel reliving it through the stories you've been telling in this podcast?
Yeah, it's still a bit unbelievable to me, I think. I still am always a bit surprised at where it ended up. Very proud of it. Very proud of the people in the business who've been through the journey. It was never intended to be this big. That's just where it went. So, but yeah, it's always very proud to reflect back on it. And I think it's sometimes hard to sort of see it yourself. You're so in it, and there's always the problems and the stress. There's lots of stuff going on. It's often hard. It's often takes somebody from the outside who comes in, who can reflect it back at you to really appreciate it sometimes. So, and some of those moments are where it really hits you.
Absolutely right. Even just hearing it, everyone's got to be in awe of that story and what you were able to achieve, not only just individually, but as a team across all of those countries and with the partners that you were able to set up. I mean, it's just an incredible story. So thank you very much for sharing it.
No worries.
And I wanted to finish just by, it's usually one question about the show. The show is always about how people can most effectively make change possible within their business in one way or another. From an entrepreneur's standpoint, you've been both an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur, obviously, in the time that you've been with PaperCut. What would your advice be to an entrepreneur, starting with that, for somebody who's starting out today and would have dreams and aspirations? What would your advice be to them?
I think give it a go. I think that's the thing. I think in my nature, I'm quite nervous to give things a go. I think I remember back to the point where I got the phone call from Chris to say, do you want to join me, leave your safe, successful job and go into this thing? And I think it was my dad who ended up convincing me. He was entrepreneurial as well, so it's probably a little bit in my blood. But yeah, give it a go. Give it your best. Be really open-minded. I think that self-awareness, sometimes I see people who can get a bit stuck in their opinions. In that early stage of starting something up, you have to be open to yourself being wrong, your assumptions being wrong, and like being able to be really open and really listening to what is happening to your product and your market. And that is hard because we get really attached to our ideas, but you need to be really open to change. And I think I'm thinking, I guess, of product sort of entrepreneurs. I think the best product people are those people who can hold those ideas lightly and really listen and adapt. And that's really important early on.
there be anything else that you'd say to entrepreneurs to the same question, really? Would you feel that people within a bigger organization would benefit from the same advice, or would you say something different?
I suspect those entrepreneurs are probably the ones who feel like they're the open-minded ones, and maybe everybody else in the organization isn't. So trying to engender that openness is a challenge for them. No, I feel like being brave and be able to, because I suspect, and I have not lived this experience, but I can imagine you have to be quite brave and also have a self-awareness to be able to deal with all that feedback that would come when you're trying to challenge ideas and challenge the status quo, and be able to sort of be calm and reason through that. So probably something about that being that thinking about working on you, and you're being self-reflective and brave and being willing to step into it. I guess it's obviously it can be quite a risky thing being an entrepreneur. I could imagine in some organizations, maybe it's just the way that it translates. It's risky to be an entrepreneur because maybe it's your money or your house on the line. And it's risky to be an entrepreneur because you kind of got to put yourself out there.
And your money and your house is on the line. Because if you don't have your job, you don't have that either.
That's true. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. There you go. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for the chat, Matt. Really enjoyed it this evening. You've just given us such an inspirational story to take so much from. So thank you very much. I usually finish the show just by asking the guests if they would like to share any contact details about themselves. If people want to get in touch, ask you a question after hearing the story, maybe they want to get in touch and say hello or something. Would you want to share anything there?
My LinkedIn profile, they could ping me through there. There's a lot of noise on those LinkedIn profiles, but I'll try to find the signal in the noise.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Matt, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Chris. It was great.
Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you're hearing this message, you've listened all the way to the end, so thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and share this episode with your friends, team members, leaders, if you think it'll make a difference. After all, we're trying to help you, the entrepreneurs, kick more goals within your organizations. If you have any questions about the things we covered in the show, please email me directly at chris@companyroad.co. I answer all messages, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And to hear about the latest episodes and updates, please head to companyroad.co to subscribe. Tune in next Wednesday for another new episode.